Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you, Ken?
I am exceptionally well, and a warm welcome to episode 105 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We have got a packed episode. You're going to be glad you joined into this one. We're going to be kicking off speaking about what defines the therapeutic relationship. And then we're going into practice matters where, Rory, you're going to be speaking about distractions in the therapy room.
Yes, distractions in the therapy room. This is a question that's come from our Facebook group. If you don't know where our Facebook group is, type in Counselling Tutor into Facebook, click return, and what will happen is you'll find us. We're a closed group, but if you click on, we'll let you in very quickly, and you can join 22,500 other people interested in the world of counselling and psychotherapy, students, supervisors, tutors, lots of people all talking about counselling and counselling-related matters. And one of the questions was asked, how do you handle distractions in the therapy room? So I've been practising, I think, for about 17 years now, and I'm going to share some stories of distractions that I've had to work with and how I've worked with them, and how I've worked with them really clearly in the service of the client, because sometimes there are distractions in the therapy room, as we'll see.
Oh, yeah, you can bank on it. If you're in practice, you're going to be distracted at one time or another. I got a few stories that bring smiles to my face as well, Rory, but we'll get to that. But we're ending episode 105 today by speaking about placement interview questions. This is, again, another topic that has come up on that Facebook group. So make sure you get into our Facebook group because you can join in those conversations. But starting off, what defines the therapeutic relationship, Rory?
Yes, it's an interesting question, isn't it? And I think I'd answer it by saying that it's not just one element. There's a theorist called Petruska Clarkson, and she talks about the 5 relationship model. And part of it, I think, one of the things that defines the therapeutic relationship is the contract, because we start from there, don't we? We start from the contract. And once the contract's in place and everybody knows where they are, then we can start moving forward. So that's the first thing. And I also like to think about something called the I-thou relationship. Now, this is a relationship talked about by a philosopher. And I-thou is this idea of seeing the client as a spiritual person, as opposed to just another person. You're seeing not just who they are, but you're seeing the essence of them. And that is so, so important in the world of counselling and psychotherapy, to get a sense of who they are, their essence, and really, really important. And of course, one of the other aspects that I think defines a therapeutic relationship, of course, is understanding our transference and counter-transference, whether it's from the client or from ourselves.
Yeah, 100%.
Just super important. And also modelling, I think, modelling being who you are, because clients will look on us, rightly or wrongly, I think most times wrongly, as kind of finished people, completely polished, the finished article. But I think there's something about modelling and something about, being stable within the therapeutic relationship when the client may be in chaos. So I think those ingredients are really, really useful things. I think those define the relationship. And it's something that I'm aware of in my practice, the quality of the relationship. And I think the ability to repair fractures. I think, there's this idea that if there's something that's implicit, where you get the sense of a client who's either resistive or maybe something unsaid between you, that you say it and you use immediacy and you say, I'm just aware that it just feels that there's something between us. I'm not quite sure what that is. And be honest and be congruent. And if those are in place, I think that you can have a really deep, really meaningful and really facilitative therapeutic relationship in the service of the client.
I like that. It's what defines that therapeutic relationship, and I think you've covered some really important elements of that. And I just wanted to pick up on the 5 relationship model, Petruska-Clarkson, which I struggle to say that name. I don't know why it is. I've just got a blockage in. If you are a member of our paid for resources, which is the Counselling Study Resource, there's a phenomenal lecture on that. You just log into CSR, Counselling Study Resource, go to the lecture library, and it's under the theory section. Worth having a look. And when you're in that theory section, do Rory's lecture on transference and counter-transference as well, because it kind of all links in there. So the therapeutic relationship is so important. It kind of, I think, is probably more important than the modality that is being practiced, because without the relationship being there is no trust. The client, you can't go with the client. They won't let you go with them unless they trust you enough to let you into that emotional side part of them. And it's really interesting. It is, I guess, for me, idiosyncratic, and that basically means that it differs from person to person that comes into the room, in the same way as friendships differ. You'll meet some people and you'll say, I don't know what it is, but I really like that person. There's something about them that really ticks my boxes. Again, referring to the transference, counter-transference lecture there to kind of understand that. And you'll meet other people where it's not something they said, it's not something they did, it's not even how they look, but you'll feel, is that the kind of person that I would like to hang out with? And again, within the therapeutic relationship, it's slightly different because it is a very boundaried relationship. It is contracted, as you said, Rory, but there is an element of connection, a connection that is almost indescribable that happens. And when you've been in practice for some time, you will know firsthand that feeling, almost a feeling of electricity that is right there in the room, happening within the relationship. And it is outside, it transcends the model that is practiced, whether it be person-centered or a behavioral model or more psychodynamic. It transcends that. It is just two people being in connection in a very deep, special relationship. And I think examining what makes up that therapeutic relationship, what defines it, so important, an important part of practice, no matter how long you've been in practice, I think, Rory, whether you're just about to go into placement, you're in placement, or if you've done it for 20 years, it's worth revisiting.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right, Ken. There's some research done by Norcross about 20 years ago, massive sampling, thousands and thousands of clients were interviewed, and it came down to what's been talked about for years. I know I've mentioned the dodo bird effect a lot on this podcast, but it comes down to that very early research to say that the quality of the relationship does most of the time out or trump the modality. It's the quality of the relationship that is the most important factor for a positive outcome for the client.
Definitely. A few ingredients from my side that define that relationship and kind of build on that relationship are the simple theories that we see in person-centered of being non-judgmental. No matter what that person brings, seeing the person for who they are, a fellow human being, rather than maybe something they did that they may be feeling shame for. Just unconditional positive regard goes such a long way in kind of adding to those elements that creates that relationship. And so many times in therapy, I've seen it again and again and again, where someone has not been able to tell anybody this information, but they then trust and bring it into the relationship. And that relationship needs to be defined. It needs to be a trusting place, and it needs to be, I guess, very non-judgmental for the person to feel safe to do so.
Yes, and as the philosopher Martin Buber said, it's the I-thou relationship, seeing that person as a spiritual person. And Clarkson had an interesting take on it. Petruska-Clarkson, she believed that the therapeutic relationship was akin to cousins. That it's that relationship that cousins have, where they're not very close, but they're not very distant. So really interesting. If you ever get a chance to read the book, The Therapeutic Relationship, it's a really good read. And I think it's a pretty timeless piece of work.
Like it. So there we have it. What defines the therapeutic relationship? Moving on now to practice matters, where Rory, you're going to be discussing distractions in the therapy room. And when I saw the topic, it made me smile. I think back to I was not long in private practice. We had some snow in my local town of Warrington in the northwest of England, which kind of had thrown some of the timetables of the regular service providers out, I guess is a way of saying it. And I'd just come to the end of a session. We'd closed off the session with a client. I was on the first floor of my house because it's got a ground floor and an upper floor. And I could see that the client was looking over my shoulder, puzzled at where I knew the window was. And I thought, well, they may be processing something, so I'm not going to put much attention on that. But it went on uncomfortably long. And I eventually did turn around, and sure enough, there at the window, Rory, was a man's face as he was wiping the window. And he should have come a few days earlier. The snow had kind of changed that. But there was a person in my therapy room looking in. It turned out that the client and I had a good laugh about it, and the therapy was open, and I was able to have a bit of a chat with those service providers that do the windows about not coming on the days that I practice. But that was an interruption.
Indeed, yes, and I've got many stories like that. One I can share was observing a skills session many years ago, and it was the time when it was very popular to download your own music as a ringtone for your phone. And I was observing this skills session. It was a wonderful skills session. There was some really good work being done. And all of a sudden, I could hear the disco tune, Can You Feel It, playing in the room. And it got louder and louder and louder.
No.
Yes, somebody, can you feel it? Can you feel it? And somebody had left their phone on, and the ringtone, and the phone itself just got louder and louder until you answered it. So I'm going to share a few stories about that, some funny stories. And also I'm going to talk about how do we deal with that in the service of the client, the serious stuff. How do we deal with that in the service of the client? How do we deal with it professionally? And of course, I made a super duper handout to help you with that.
Great topic. Let's go into Practice Matters with Rory after this very short message.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
How to deal with distractions in the therapy room. It's a fair bet that at some point in your career, you'll have to manage some form of distraction in the therapy room. So let me talk about my experiences. But before I do, it's worth remembering that sometimes events are really out of your control, as we will see. One of the biggest distractions is mobile phones. On one occasion, I had a client whose phone kept ringing and she would answer it and get into a full-blown conversation. On another occasion, I had a client who handed me her phone and asked if I would speak to her husband. On both these occasions, I politely reaffirmed the contract, explored what was going on for the client, and politely but firmly explained the boundaries in the therapy room. Another distraction is fire alarms. It's a fact of life that if you practice within an organisation, at some point a fire alarm will go off and you may need to evacuate the premises. In times like this, you'll have to become directive and may need to point the client to the fire exit. If the building is on fire, saying to the client, it feels like the fire alarm is going off. I wonder how you feel about leaving the room, is not very helpful. Instead, calmly acknowledge the fire alarm and ask the client to follow you to the emergency exit. If you work for any organisation, you have to know the fire escape plan and be able to guide visitors to the fire exit, unless, of course, your own life is at risk. If you work for an organisation that has a regular alarm test, find out when it is, and if you're seeing a new client on that day, make them aware of it. I've had two memorable incidents of fire alarms. The first was when I was counselling in a school. I was working with a client who was profoundly processing her feelings. When the fire alarm went off, I said, "Follow me," and we left the building. As we queued to leave the building, I was conscious not to get into any conversation that was counselling related as students and staff surrounded us. Eventually, my client disappeared into a sea of young people lining up for roll call. I did not have a chance to make a further appointment. However, we did meet up again and took some time in the session to explore the events of the previous week. A few years ago, I was working in private practice when about 10 minutes into the session, the fire alarm went off. The client and I left the room only to be told by a member of staff it was a false alarm, but she could not stop the loud siren. It was impossible to counsel in this environment, so I brought the session to an end and waived my fee. In both cases, the clients were happy with how I dealt with the situation. However, I did reflect in supervision that I exercised power and direction. Saying to someone, "Follow me, we're going," is about as directive as you get. The other distractions are people appearing at windows and peering in. Ken has alluded to this in his own practice, but I can tell you about the last year of my placement. I was using a room on the second floor, and my chair was facing the window with my clients sat with their back to it. About 10 minutes into the session, I noticed a ladder appear at the window, and a firefighter appeared, complete with a yellow helmet, and gestured me to open the window, which I did. Unbeknown to the practice manager, the fire service decided to do a spot visit, and they thought it was okay to nip up a ladder and test if the fire exit worked adequately. The client burst out laughing. I made a stunned apology, and it was certainly a memorable session. I've talked about intrusions externally, but intrusions into the actual therapy room. At one session, I was working with a school client, and the janitor walked in, set up a stepladder, and started to remove a ceiling tile. When I challenged this, he kept repeating, "Oh, the principal's asked me to replace one of the tiles in her office." I had to abandon the session and apologise to the client. And later, I paid a visit to the janitor's office, and we had what is known as a very frank exchange of views. As I said in the beginning, if you counsel long enough, at some point you will experience some form of distraction. When this happens, remember, put it into your clinical notes, discuss it with your clients, and also keep a sense of humour.
Thank you as always, Rory. And of course, if you want to get Rory's super duper handout that covers those distractions in the therapy room, and of course, the more serious side of that as well, repairing the fractures that may be caused from that, then you can get that for free. And all you need to do is go to our website where our podcast is hosted. And our website is counsellingtutor.com. That's counselling with 2 L's because we're based in the United Kingdom. When you get to the website homepage, you'll notice at the top a little tab that says podcasts. Click on that. Go to episode 105, that's 105. All the show notes of what we've discussed today are there, including any links out of the site to additional resources. And of course, from that very page, you can download Rory's super duper handout by just popping in your email address, and we'll send it right to your inbox. And if you are already a member of our paid for resource, which we call the Counselling Study Resource, well, that handout has already been added to your handouts vault. So no need to go and download that. Just log into your handouts vault and it is there for you. But more about Counselling Study Resource at the end of today's episode if you want to learn more about that. But now we're going straight into a very, very hot topic that comes up again and again. And this is placement interview questions. And I guess if you're already qualified, you've already done your placement, listen to this anyway, because you can take away the word placement and put interview questions in there just as easy. Placement interview questions, Rory.
Yes, well, I can remember going for my interview when I was a student, and it was a group interview. So we were asking an ethical question, and I still remember it to this day. It was about touch. You know, should you touch clients? And it sparked a big debate within our group. I think there was about 20 people looking for placements. And then we had an individual interview. And there's huge amounts of questions that you could ask your student. When I used to be on the interview panel, one of the things I was really interested in was personal development. What kind of personal development has someone undertaken? You can cite examples of it. Because you're going to work with clients, you need a heightened sense of yourself, you know, where you are. You know, I know I laugh and talk about transference and counter-transference, but you need someone who has a good understanding of their own processes before they can work with a client. I might also ask, what prejudices does somebody have? And I think that's a good question to ask, because if someone gives you an honest answer, you know two things. One is that they giving you an honest answer. I'm never too sure about people who say I don't have any prejudices. I'm never too sure about that. I'm sure there are people who may not have any prejudices, but I think if someone gives you an answer, then you can. That's a discussion of you can talk about it, you can look at it, and also you can assess any kind of risk. If somebody said, "Oh, I don't really like women," I think that's going to be a difficulty. You can't just have a therapist who goes and sees men. That's about personal development. So that actually links into the first question. I'm also interested in if they have an understanding of confidentiality. So important. What is confidentiality? When would you break confidentiality? And the answer to that question can be quite telling. Some people, I've met people who have had no concept of confidentiality, and this is second year level 4 students, no concept of it, which is a bit worrying. So confidentiality is one. And then I'd ask general questions like availability. So I'd be very keen to know if people could turn up on the same day every week. So when I hear people say, well, I'm working shifts, which I know some people do, so I can't make it this week and I can't make it that week. Well, quite frankly, that is no good in the service of the client. You can't just say to the client, well, we'll do one day and then we'll do 3 weeks. It doesn't work that way. So people have to be committed. So those are some of the questions that I'd be interested in getting the answers to.
It comes up a lot, and usually with maybe a little anxiety behind the question of I have an opportunity for a placement interview coming up. What kind of stuff should I be studying? What are they going to ask? What's this going to mean? And my take on this, and it actually comes from some advice that you gave some time ago, Rory, and that you have given on the podcast as well. And that is, when you're going into a placement, you are at the top of your learning arc. You've got the newest and the freshest information. It's all fresh for you. You've just learned it. You're going through the theories. You're having your theory evaluated to put you back on track. You're having your skills assessed within your learning institution and tweaked. You really are right at that point. And you have a lot to give to the placement. They do not hold all the power. So going in, it is not the mighty placement who will hand down the crumbs of an opportunity for you to work there. It is a mutual relationship. And it's worth keeping that in mind, that you have some power in that as well. And when it comes to what kind of placement interview questions might come up, I'm going to go to the other side of this, and I'm going to say, what kind of questions have you prepared to ask the placement to see if that placement suits you? It is their job to see if you will suit the placement, but that placement needs to suit you as well. And questions may be around if the placement has a specific client type, and let's just take loss and bereavement as an example here. You might ask what support and training they can give you on their specialist area. You get to ask some questions, I guess, is the message.
Absolutely. And I can still remember my placement interview. It's amazing. It was 16 or 17 years ago now. And I was sat next to a qualified colleague. She was a psychoanalytical therapist, and she was needing some hours for accreditation. And she was really interesting because her learning journey was far in advance of mine, and we had a lovely conversation about things. And she said, when I went in, I asked to see the rooms. And I said, what? You went in and asked to see the rooms. I'm thinking, oh, how brave is this person? This is very brave. And in that kind of a voice. And she went in and she said, can I see the room? She was a
good for her
professional practitioner who wanted to make sure that where she was going to go was going to offer the best service for her clients. I don't know her name, and we never met again. I don't know if she's still practicing, but it was one of the greatest lessons that I learned in my training. That you have a voice, as Ken said, you have a voice, and everything we do is in service of the client.
100%. And the when you go into your placement, there is a triangular contract that is put in place. Your contract is between your placement, your supervisor, and your place of learning. Your university, your college, your private provider. That is where that contract sits, and it's about you being supported in that. And you need to be supported by your placement as well in terms of their policies, their procedures, how they operate. It needs to be enriching for you. And both myself and Rory, we have supervised in the clinical capacity, and often a supervisee would bring in challenges with placements, and that's the last distraction you need, is when you have challenges with your placement. I mean, challenges come up in everything, and we need to work through those. But when you've got week after week after week, instead of bringing into supervision client material, you're bringing in challenges that you're facing in your placement. It kind of leads me back to getting a placement is important. In fact, it's imperative. It is a requirement if you're in the UK and you're working to be a practicing counsellor. But getting the right placement is more important than getting a placement. And it may well be, if you get into a placement and you see that they don't have the support, the policies, procedures to kind of support you, look around, find somewhere else, find the right placement for you where you can grow and you can flourish and you can be nurtured by the placement that you're in.
Yes, absolutely. And, we talk a lot about the core conditions. It's a common language in therapy. The core conditions should be in place everywhere, including your placement. And, those people who are taking you on, more senior colleagues, should be seeing you as a colleague in training. That's the level of dialogue and the level of respect, professional respect that you would expect. You give that and you receive it. So it's been just one fantastic episode. We started off with what defines the therapeutic relationship. In Practice Matters, I talked about distractions in the therapy room and shared some stories from my experience. And finally, we spoke about questions in placement. What a fantastic episode, Ken.
It is. And I guess if there's one final little nugget to throw in at the end of the placement interviews and interview questions, and it is the topic of CPD. CPD, continuing professional development, is not a requirement when you are a student, because you're studying, you're on a course and you're learning. It's not a requirement. However, sometimes there are more students per placement than there are placement places. So you may be in competition against others. And let's say, for instance, I'm just taking the bereavement again as an example. Let's say that the agency's focus is bereavement or loss. If you can kind of go in and evidence that you've done some learning outside of your regular coursework on them as an agency, what they stand for, what they mean, what they do, and you can say, you know what, I've also done a little bit of reading up and training on loss and bereavement as a starter. You never know. It could kind of just balance it over. And a great place to do that, if you are a member of the Counselling Study Resource, is the Counselling Study Resource, because we've got over 50 hours of lectures, all linked to CPD certificates. So dive in and do those. You can't go wrong having CPD certificates. They can only count in your favour. But it has indeed been a great episode, and more, of course, information about Counselling Study Resource coming up in a mo.
Yeah, and as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.